My name is Eleanor Whitfield. I'm 78 years old. I gave everything to my family, my love, my time, even the roof over their heads. But one day I became an extra mouth. That's what my son called me when he thought I wasn't listening. So I left quietly. But I didn't just walk away. I walked into something stronger. And in the end, they saw me differently. Before I share my story, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss more stories like mine, stories of strength, healing, and quiet justice. And tell me in the comments where in the world are you watching from? Let's see how far Eleanor's voice travel. When my husband passed, I didn't feel the loss all at once. It came in waves, first in the silence of our house, where the radio stayed off because no one was there to hum along with it. Then in the mornings, when I still poured 2 cups of coffee out of habit, only to stare at the untouched one, going cold by the window. I thought the world would give me more time to grieve. But bills came, and loneliness followed quicker than expected. So, when my son David called and offered me the guest flat above their garage, I accepted with a grateful heart. He said it was, "Just until you land on your feet, Mom." He meant well, or at least I believed he did then. The space was small, but I made it warm. I brought my favorite rocking chair, the quilt my mother had stitched when I was a girl, and my old copper kettle. I spent my days helping with the kids making their lunches, folding tiny socks, reading bedtime stories when David and Jessica were too tired. I paid for groceries without a word, often slipping extra items into the cart when Jessica wasn't looking. David had just been promoted, and money seemed tight on their end. I didn't mind. Family took care of family. But slowly, something in the air began to shift. Jessica stopped sitting with me during breakfast. The children, once so eager to hug me, started spending more time on their iPads than curled against my side. David began working longer hours, or maybe just coming home later. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I was too quiet. Maybe I meddled. I started keeping to myself, staying mostly in the flat, making tea alone and watching the world through the small square window that looked onto the garden. Then, one morning, I came downstairs earlier than usual. I heard their voices before they noticed me. "She's just an extra mouth," Jessica said, her voice sharp, impatient. "We don't have space for that anymore." There was a pause, and then David replied, lower, almost tired. "I know, but what do you want me to do? She's my mother." I didn't move. I didn't speak. I simply turned and climbed the stairs back to my flat, each step heavier than the last. I sat in my rocking chair and looked at the fading picture on the side, table the one from our last family vacation, all of us laughing under the sun. My husband had his arm around me. The children were small. That moment felt like it had happened in someone else's life. I chuckled, quietly, like it was a joke I was in on too. But deep down, something cracked open. Not with rage or grief, but with something colder, awareness. I wasn't grieving anymore, I was being erased. I tried to forget what I'd overheard. I really did. But some words, once spoken, live under your skin. An extra mouth. I told myself I'd misheard, or misunderstood, or that they didn't mean it the way it sounded. So, I smiled through breakfasts and school drop-offs. I kept folding laundry, seasoning the stew just the way the children liked it. But no matter how many things I did right, I felt the shift. Or rather, the cold creeping into what used to be warmth. Jessica started closing the curtains in the living room when she was home. Not out of sunlight, but privacy. From me. I'd go to sit with her and the children, and suddenly she'd just remembered a call she had to take, or she'd leave to tidy something upstairs. It wasn't cruel, just intentional, controlled. I began eating meals upstairs in the flat more often. I'd wait for the clatter of dishes to stop before coming down to make my tea. I wasn't told to do that, no one said I couldn't join. But it became clear I wasn't expected to. The grandkids, bless their hearts, started mimicking what they saw, pulling away when I hugged them, rolling their eyes when I reminded them to say thank you. Once, the youngest looked at me and asked, "Why are you always here?" I had no answer. When my birthday came and went without a word, I told myself they'd simply forgotten. It happens, doesn't it? Grown children get busy. They don't mean harm. But I sat in my room that evening, a little cupcake I'd bought, for myself on the nightstand, candle unlit, and I felt something inside me sink deeper than sadness, something that whispered, "You are no longer part of their story." A few weeks later, Jessica hosted a family barbecue. Friends, co-workers, other mothers from school came. I helped with setting out plates and stirring the coleslaw. No one thanked me. They passed me like I was just another shadow near the food table. I overheard a woman ask David, "So how long is your mom staying with you?" There was a pause. I didn't wait for his answer. I slipped away to the side fence where the climbing rose bushes had once bloomed. They'd withered this year, unnoticed. That night, David knocked on the flat door. I was in bed, pretending to read. He stood in the doorway like a man asking for forgiveness without knowing what for. "Mom," he said, shifting his weight, "you've been amazing. Really. We're just thinking, maybe you'd be happier with people your age. Somewhere with activities, a community, you know?" I stared at him, at his tired eyes, at the boy I raised, the boy who once cried when I dropped him off at kindergarten. And I smiled. "That's a kind thought, David," I said softly. He looked relieved. After he left, I sat alone and pulled out a small, heavy box from the bottom drawer of my nightstand. Inside was a porcelain tea set. My husband had bought it for our 40th anniversary. He'd said, "One day, when we're old and gray, we'll have our morning tea together in this, on the porch, with lemon and honey." We never got to use it. I had brought it with me still in its box, still waiting for mornings that would never come. I set one of the delicate cups on the table and looked at it under the soft yellow light. My fingers trembled as I ran them along the edge, and then quietly I began to cry. Not loudly, not broken, just the kind of cry that escapes when there's no room left inside to carry what you've swallowed. They weren't pushing me out violently. No shouting, no insults. That would have been easier to name. No, they were cutting me away with politeness, so sharp, it didn't leave a wound. Just absence. The kind that you feel most when you look at a place once called home and realize you are no longer welcome. The text came on a Tuesday morning. I was halfway through folding David's youngest son's laundry when my phone buzzed. The message preview blinked up from the screen, simple and sharp. "Mom, Jess and I talked. We think it's best if you move out by the end of the month. The kids need more space. Hope you understand." I didn't open it right away. I stared at it for a long time, the cotton shirt in my hand suspended in midair. My chest tightened with something I couldn't name, not surprise. Not quite sadness either. It felt more like finality. I opened the message and reread it. Once, twice, a third time. Each time, the words dug in a little deeper. "We think it's best. Hope you understand. Hope I understand." I placed the folded clothes back into the basket. Then I went upstairs and sat at the edge of my small bed, next to the rocking chair that had become my only confidant in recent months. I wanted to cry, but nothing came, just an odd numbness, like I'd been waiting for this message all along, even while pretending I hadn't been. I packed my belongings slowly over the next few days, folded the shawl my mother had knitted me, boxed up the tea set I had never used. I didn't ask for help. I didn't expect it either. On my last day, I stood in the driveway beside 2 neat suitcases and a worn cardboard box of books. David walked out with his phone in hand, offering a quick one-armed hug. "We'll visit when things settle down," he said. I didn't reply. I simply nodded. There was nothing left to say. Jessica didn't come outside. No one waved goodbye. The taxi driver helped me load the luggage. We drove in silence. I watched the house disappear in the rearview mirror. I had once made that house a home, painted the walls, planted roses by the front step, changed diapers in that upstairs hallway. But now, I was just the last thing they cleared out to make room. The senior apartment complex they moved me into was tidy, quiet, and gray. Gray walls, gray carpet, gray skies. The manager showed me to my unit, a small corner apartment with 1 bedroom, a kitchenette, and a window that overlooked a brick wall. I smiled politely, nodded through the tour, and closed the door behind me. Then I sat at the tiny round table by the window and listened. No sound. Not the laughter of children. Not the voice of a husband calling out from another room. Not even the faint thump of music from a neighbor's apartment. It was the kind of silence that didn't soothe. It stared back at you. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat awake, wrapped in my shawl, flipping through the old binder of papers I'd brought: pension information, savings account details, the will my husband and I had drafted years ago. And then, there it was, tucked behind a tax form and nearly forgotten. A property deed. I held it up to the light, blinking in disbelief. The building David lived in, the one he called their home, the one I had moved into after my husband passed, was still in my name. Not jointly, not conditionally. Mine. I stared at the embossed seal, my breath caught somewhere in my chest. It wasn't revenge that came over me in that moment. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. A quiet return of something that had been taken from me piece by piece. My voice. My space. My worth. And now I had something they didn't expect. Leverage. The paper felt dry in my hands, almost brittle with age, but the ink hadn't faded. It was all there, printed in clean, sharp letters. The address of the property, the parcel number, the name of the trustee, and finally, mine. Eleanor M. Whitfield. Sole owner. I stared at it for what must have been an hour. I even took my glasses off and wiped them, as if clearer lenses might somehow make the truth less surprising. David and Jessica's home, as they always called it, wasn't just some gift my husband left to them in kindness. It had been purchased, through our trust, using the retirement fund my husband carefully built over 4 decades. He hadn't signed it over to them, not legally. When we set up that building, it was meant to be an investment. Rental units for retirement income. A fallback. And somehow, somewhere in all the years and grief and distractions, I had forgotten. The deed was never transferred. My name was still the one that mattered. I sat back in the wooden chair by my tiny kitchen table. That old binder still, open like a treasure chest I hadn't known I possessed. I closed my eyes, feeling the echo of my husband's presence. Not in a ghostly way, but in that firm, quiet logic he carried like second skin. "Always keep things in writing, Ellie," he used to say. "Memories fade. Paper doesn't." I held the deed to my chest, not like a weapon, but like an heirloom finally returned. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about control. It was about dignity, about not being treated like an extra mouth, when my very name was the reason they had that roof at all. The next morning, I ironed my only good blouse and walked to the bus stop. The law office was just 2 stops into the city. I hadn't been there in years, but the place looked the same. Old wood paneling, the smell of stale coffee and legal folders. A young man with a cropped beard greeted me at the front desk. "I'd like to speak to someone about property ownership," I said. "I have all the paperwork." It's a bit overdue. The lawyer I met was named Marcia. Kind eyes, sensible shoes, and a calm voice that made me feel like I wasn't just some old woman fumbling through her past. She scanned the deed, then double-checked it against online records, and she looked up, blinking once. Mrs. Whitfield, you are still the sole legal owner of this building. I nodded. She went on, explaining my options, her tone growing more respectful with each sentence. I could reclaim full property management. I could modify lease agreements. I could even file for eviction if necessary. Not that I was planning to. I'm not looking to make anyone homeless, I said. I just want to stop disappearing. Marcia smiled at that. Then let's help you reappear, in writing. We spent the next 2 hours filing the necessary paperwork, reaffirming ownership, setting up an LLC for protection, drafting notices for the current tenants, including the unit occupied by David and Jessica. I didn't tell them. Not yet. There was no satisfaction in rubbing it in their faces. That wasn't the point. It wasn't revenge. It was justice. Quiet, legal, and slow burning. The kind that builds its own kind of dignity. Later that afternoon, back in my small gray apartment, I sat down and made one more call. To the property. Manager listed on the original papers. Hello, this is Eleanor Whitfield, I said, with more steadiness than I expected. Yes, I'm the listed owner. I'd like to resume oversight of the property at 6th and Meadowbrook. Effective immediately. There was a pause, then a polite, Of course, ma'am. Would you like to set up a time for walkthroughs or any initial changes? No rush, I replied. Just start sending all reports and communications to me from now on. And please, send copies of all active lease agreements, especially Unit 3A. That was David's, that was home. Only it wasn't theirs anymore. Not by legal right. Not in silence. I hung up, stared out my small window at the brick wall once more. And for the first time since moving in, I didn't feel trapped by it. Because I knew something they didn't. The bricks of their comfort were built with my name. Didn't rush. It took me 3 full months to restructure everything, and I made sure each step was legal, documented, and quietly executed. The first lease agreement I reviewed was for Unit 3A, the very space where David and Jessica had lived for years without paying a cent. They never questioned it. I suppose they assumed it had always been theirs, a gift or a given. But no, it had simply been overlooked. Taken for granted, like me. I updated their lease with the help of Marcia, my lawyer, setting the new monthly rate to match market value, fair, even generous, compared to what the surrounding buildings were charging. But for them, it would feel like a storm out of nowhere. The new agreement arrived in their mailbox the same way it arrived for every tenant, a neatly sealed envelope with a polite cover letter. A professional notice, not a personal blow. For a week, I heard nothing. Then came the first text from Jessica. What is this? Is this a mistake? Call me. I didn't reply. The next message came from David. Mom, can we talk? That one sat longer in my inbox, unread. I held the phone in my hand, staring at his words, hearing the old version of his voice in my head, the one from when he used to kiss my cheek before school, or when he whispered, "Don't tell Dad," after breaking the garage window. But this wasn't that boy anymore, and I wasn't that mother, standing with a broom and a forgiving smile. So I put the phone down. Instead, I called the contractor. The building entrance needed work, new signage, fresh paint, and a proper garden path. I told the workers to remove the old doormat that said the Johnsons and replace it with a clean slate. I also added my name to the mailbox roster, Whitfield Management. Each morning after that, I began walking past the complex, not always going in, but just passing by, watching. I saw Jessica stand on the porch once, yelling into her phone, likely at the property manager. I saw David come home late, shoulders hunched. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel guilt. I felt balance. They had taught me how disposable love could feel when buried beneath convenience. I was teaching them what accountability looked like when dressed in paperwork. Meanwhile, something shifted in me. I started planting again, just window herbs and potted flowers at first. But the colors felt like hope. I even hosted a small afternoon tea in the community center of my senior complex. Just 3 other women showed up, but we laughed. We swapped stories. I told them about my husband's cinnamon scone recipe, and they asked for it. It had been so long since someone asked me for anything that wasn't a favor or money. And one quiet Thursday morning, I opened the closet and saw the porcelain tea set again, still untouched. I took it down, washed it gently, and made myself a cup of jasmine tea. It tasted like memory and morning light. No one needed to be punished. Not really, but I had no intention of being forgotten. I was done tiptoeing through other people's comfort zones, shrinking myself to make room. Now, I was setting the table. And this time, my name was on the deed, the lease, and the mailbox. The building's meeting room smelled like lemon polish and dust, the kind of clean that tries too hard to cover up years of neglect. I sat at the head of the long oak table. No frills, no lawyer. Just me, a small notepad, and my husband's old fountain pen, the one he always used for important decisions. Its weight steadied my hand. David arrived first. He was wearing a button-down shirt I'd bought him for a long-forgotten birthday. It had always fit him well, though he looked smaller in it now, thinner around the shoulders, like the weight of recent months had chipped something away. Jessica followed, arms crossed, jaw set like granite. She didn't say hello. David cleared his throat and placed a folder on the table. Mrs. Whitfield, he corrected himself awkwardly, like he wasn't sure which version of me he'd be facing today. We got the notice. We were hoping there was some kind of misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, I said calmly. Just an update to terms. I've resumed management. Jessica let out a sharp breath, half laugh, half scoff. David sat down, flipping open his folder like a schoolboy pleading for a second chance on a failed test. We've lived there for years, he said, and it was always well. We assumed it was our home. It was never gifted, I replied. You assumed wrong. Jessica finally spoke. So what now? You want us to pay you rent? Triple the amount, out of nowhere, after everything? Her voice cracked with indignation, but I didn't flinch. I never asked for a handout, I said, my fingers resting gently on the cool brass of my husband's pen. I didn't come to your door with demands. I came with casseroles, with laundry, folded with hands that raised your children while you were building your lives. I was part of your life until I became inconvenient. David's face fell. He didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. You pushed me out, I continued, my voice steady but low. With silence, with exclusion, with kindness that became conditional. And now here we are. Not as mother and son, not as family, just as people, renegotiating space. There was a long pause. Then I pushed the new lease agreement across the table. You have a choice. Stay and pay, like the rest, or move out within 60 days. No tricks, no hard feelings, just terms. Jessica's mouth opened, but David placed his hand on hers. He looked at me, really looked for the first time in a long while. You're serious, he said. I'm fair, I replied. He swallowed hard, then nodded once. Not in agreement, just in acknowledgement. I stood slowly, gathering my things. I raised you better than this, I said softly. David looked down at the papers. Jessica looked away, and I walked out. No shouting, no slamming of doors, no vindictive words tossed over my shoulder. Just quiet shoes on tile, and the sense that I had stepped back into the center of my own story 2 years past. Quietly. Softly. I now live on the top floor of the building, the very one I once managed from a distance, afraid to be seen, afraid to take up space. It's different now. After the renovations, I claimed Unit 5C the sunniest. One with wide windows and sloped ceilings that hold the light just right in the afternoons. I painted the walls a pale blue, the color of calm seas. My husband would have liked that. The bookshelves are full again, not just with cookbooks and old family albums, but with poetry, stories, and little clay figurines my grandkids made when they were still small enough to need me. They still visit. Sometimes. Not often. But when they do, it's on my terms. We sit on the balcony with Coco and play board games. The youngest asked if he could plant a flower in my window box. I let him. It's still growing. Downstairs, a young mother named Ruby lives in Unit 2B. She's kind, always baking something, always waving when I come down to check the mail. Last week, she knocked and invited me to her tea circle. I said yes. The women were young, full of energy and noise, but they made space for me, listened, laughed at my stories. One of them said, "You're who I want to be at 80. That night, I took out a small silver frame and placed it by my window. Inside, I printed a line that had followed me for months. Respect isn't given, it's remembered. On my 80th birthday, the building surprised me. I walked into the main hall to find string lights, balloons, and a lemon cake with my name in neat white frosting. The children from the other units had made cards. Ruby handed me a paper crown and said, "We wouldn't have this place without you." Laughter echoed through the hallways, full, open, and alive. It was a sound I hadn't heard in years, and this time, it belonged to me too. Later that evening, I stepped out onto the balcony alone. The sun had dipped below the rooftops, leaving the sky brushed in lavender and gold. I could see the street below, the one I used to walk in quiet shame. Now, I looked at it like an old friend, and I whispered, not bitterly, not sadly. I was never too much. I was just misplaced.